Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Hello, and welcome back to Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. And today we're talking books and writing and lots of other stuff with Kathleen Marden. She is a leading UFO researcher, author, and lecturer. Good afternoon, Kathleen. How have you survived the summer of discontent?
Well, good afternoon. And the summer of discontent has been fine in my little house here on a lake in central Florida. I live out in the country, so it is a lot easier to be out here than for those who live in the city and who are constantly in contact with people who might be ill. So it's been a relaxing summer, but a lot of concern about COVID-19 and the people who are suffering around the world.
And Kathleen Marden is with us, not Marsden. Marden, leading UFO researcher and author. And first of all, before we get into that, where were you, born and raised and spent your early life?
I was born in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and I was raised in a small town, Kingston, New Hampshire, across the street from my grandparents' farm. It was a town of about 5,000 people and about 35 miles north of Boston, Massachusetts.
And that leads us into your next adventure. Your interest in UFOs and all that began apparently in 1961 with Betty and Barney Hill. What can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. I remember it as if it happened yesterday. I was 13 years old. I had just returned home from school, and my mother was on the phone with my Aunt Betty. And the conversation was not the usual type of conversation. There was concern. And Betty was relating to my mother that she and my uncle were concerned because there had been what they called a flying saucer that had come so close to their vehicle the night before as they were driving through the White Mountains of New Hampshire, returning home from a vacation in Canada, that they were fearful that they had been exposed to radiation. We had a neighbor who was a physicist, and so my mother was going to call him and see what he suggested. And so this became very fascinating for me as a teenager because I'd never even heard of flying saucers prior to that, and was very, very curious. So within a couple of days, we went down to Portsmouth to my aunt and uncle's home. I heard what they recalled themselves, and also about the buzzing sounds that were striking the trunk of the car that caused the vehicle to vibrate, a tingling sensation to pass through their bodies, finding themselves 35 miles down the road on another stretch of road with a little bit of memory of what happened in the interim, a fiery orb, finding themselves on a dirt road with tall trees all around, a roadblock, but they weren't precisely aware of where and when that occurred. And so they drove on home. And so there were many, many questions. They reported it to Pease Air Force Base. It was scientifically investigated, the first scientifically investigated case of UFO abduction in the United States. And I met many of the early investigators, such as Walter Webb, who was an astronomer who worked at the Hayden Planetarium in Boston, Alan Hynek, who was initially the Air Force's Project Blue Book astronomical consultant, Dr. Alan Hynek, astrophysicist, who then went on to form his own UFO study group, the Center for UFO Studies. And many others, Jacques Vallée, went to my childhood home. And so I was so impressed with these scientists, I felt that perhaps one day I would do the same kind of work. And eventually, after a career in social work and then in education, I decided to begin my own investigations. And that was 30 years ago.
And here we are today.
Yes.
Yes.
5 books later.
Right. And the one we're talking about in the main today is Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers by Kathleen Marden. But getting back to the Betty and Barney Hill incident, I remember 70s maybe, a TV movie about the incident. And the thing that struck me was the construction of what they called it in the movie, a star map of an area that up until then no one had ever known it had existed. And what do you remember about that?
Well, Stanton Friedman, my deceased now colleague from New Brunswick, was very much involved in the scientific investigation of the star map. Marjorie Fish, who was an amateur astronomer from Ohio and a member of Mensa, very intelligent woman, went on to work at the nuclear laboratory in Tennessee. But Stanton was impressed by the work she had done. She saw the star map in the first book that was ever written on their case, written in 1966, and without much of the information that is captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. But she saw the star map there, and she was skeptical. But she thought that if this place actually existed in our galaxy, that maybe she could find it. So she went to the astronomy department at Ohio State University, and she copied the distance data from the catalogs, and she took all of that home, not just the distance data, but the characteristics of all of the stars out 55 light years from our sun. And then she went home and she began to construct three-dimensional models using a frame, monofilament line, and beads of various sizes and colors to represent the types of stars out 55 light years. She started this in 1967. In 1971, she still didn't have a match, even though she had constructed 14 models. She went back to the university, and there was a new catalog with different distance data. We had made discoveries on how to measure distance data and learn more about the stars without the atmospheric interference that causes such difficulty in this kind of measurement. And so she had the new facts. She went back, and of course she had to do all of the math to know exactly where to put each star in its proper space on this three-dimensional model. And on one of those models, she had 253 stars in their proper location. She finally went back home. She moved stars around. There were now 3 stars that were in our galactic neighborhood out 55 light years due to the advances in research in astronomy. And so she put those in their proper location, and she started looking again, and lo and behold, she found a match for Betty's map. But not only was it a match for that, there were special properties that these stars had. All of the stars on Betty's map are sun-like stars, the ones connected by lines, solid lines, although only 5% of the stars in that volume of space are considered to be sun-like. And all of the sun-like stars in that volume of space were on Betty's map. That was quite extraordinary, the astronomers who vetted Marjorie's work thought. Also, they were all in a plane, which meant that it was a logical flight path for a spacecraft moving from Zeta Reticuli, which were the two stars in the foreground on Betty's map, out through the galaxy and finally up to our sun in our solar system. So many of the scientists who vetted Marjorie's work were highly impressed with what she had found. It was way beyond coincidence.
So what you're saying is there is no way that Betty and Barney, one of them or both of them, trying to poke holes like all people try to do, there's no way she could have known this in advance. Couldn't have just sat down and said, I'm going to draw a map and then they'll really believe me. So she had no background in this, talking about Betty Hill, no knowledge of stars 55 million light years away, nothing at all in her background that would suggest this.
Betty hadn't studied astronomy. She had a college degree in social work. She was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire, but she hadn't studied astronomy. I mean, even when the entity on the craft, and this was brought out through hypnosis by Dr. Benjamin Simon, who was renowned in his field and worked separately with Betty and Barney, reinstating amnesia at the end of each session, so they would not share information, contaminate one another's information. So, no, Betty did not have this knowledge previously. In fact, when she was on the craft, she said to the entity, I know you're not from around here. Where's your home port? He produced this star map, and she said, well, I don't know very much about the universe. I mean, who knew that she was being shown the entire universe? Why not our galaxy? Why not ask if it was our solar system even? So that's a demonstration of Betty's lack of knowledge at that point. She later went to the university and did take a course in astronomy many years later.
Kathleen Marden is with us. The one book we're going to discuss in the main is Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, but still some other UFO-type questions to pop into the game before we get even further into the book. UFO simply means unidentified flying object, which could be anything from a squirrel dangling from a tree that's a couple miles away and you think it's something strange, to these unexplained phenomenon. Is that right?
That's correct. As long as it's flying, it's in the air, it's an unidentified flying object. And recently, that name has been updated by the military, and they've changed it to UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, because the video, radar video that has been released by the U.S. Navy of these craft show that they have properties beyond the physical, beyond the nuts and bolts. They can fade in and out of existence. They fly in flight patterns that we cannot achieve, no one on Earth can achieve, according to the scientists, beyond our second-generation craft. So they can hover at 80,000 feet for hours on end in this one location. They can drop to 20,000 feet in a second. They can then drop to 50 feet above the ocean floor with the churn underneath, a craft just like them, but larger, was seen under the water, while the smaller craft bounced back and forth like a ping pong ball over the top of the one under the water. So our scientists are studying this. The Navy, the military, is studying it. We've had disclosure here. The Navy has admitted that the radar video is theirs. So we're making some progress.
And we're with Kathleen Marden, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, one of her many books. But, okay, now you can bring me up to speed here on what some people call UFO hotspots. I grew up on the west coast of British Columbia, southwest coast, just over the border from Washington State. It was August 30th, 1959. I'm in my bedroom listening to a BC Lions football game, as teenage kids would do. And actually, I was 10. And we had a dog, a border collie, and the dog's outside and barking. And I opened my bedroom curtain, and we had a mound, sort of, of dirt in the front yard because we hadn't finished landscaping yet. The dog is up on the top of the, up on top of the mound, pointing at the sky and barking, and there's two oval discs up there, and I can hear a whirring sound, and I looked at them, and I saw these discs, and the dog saw the discs, and then they disappeared. And so I went and told everybody, the adults in the room, of course, nice try. You know, go play with your blocks and your toy trucks, Dennis, and we'll leave it at that. I have no idea what it was. It could have been car lights coming over a hill. We weren't on a very hilly area. We were kind of at the top of a hill. Or they could have been coming up the hill, but why would they be directly in front of me? Searchlights could have, but they didn't move until they disappeared, so I have no explanation for that. And then also I'm friends with a guy in Bellingham, Washington area, Matthew Tooney, who says, oh yeah, there's been lots of activity out in the Bellingham Bay, Lummi Island area. They have reportedly a crashed craft down there somewhere. And so is there certain spots, long-winded question here, certain spots that seem to have more of this activity than others?
It seems that there is more activity around very large bodies of water, which makes me wonder if instead of flying in and out of our atmosphere, they're actually living and have their laboratories and their housing set up under the ocean. All along the coast, along the Great Lakes, that's where most of the craft are observed, around large bodies of water.
And the book is Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers with Kathleen Marden. Taking that from the title and what I've been reading, seems that there's a few people, such as Menzel and Klass, who are out to debunk anything and everything that has to do with any kind of UFO situation or encounter of the third kind or anything like that. And your book seems to have taken their arguments and ripped them up and tossed them in the shredder.
Absolutely, because they were disinformants. Now, the Air Force had done two major studies on UFOs. One in 1952, they had 4,400 reports. They investigated nearly 1,600. And in the end, after they tried to classify them as balloons, aircraft, astronomical bodies, hoaxes, insufficient data, etc., 26.94% were unknowns, meaning that they could not identify them as anything coming from our planet. In 1955, they did another study, 3,201 UFO sightings. Same thing, balloons, astronomical aircraft, etc. Of the 3,201 sighting reports studied by scientists at the prestigious Battelle Memorial Institute, 21.5% were true unknowns. they did a chi-square quality analysis. And what they discovered is the better the case, the more excellent the case, the more likely it was to be a true unknown, 35.1%. So that was significant. But the CIA became involved because some of the early major reports, such as that of Kenneth Arnold near the end of June in 1947, caused some public hysteria. And they were very concerned about the orderly functioning of the body politic. They didn't think that people should be spending a lot of time worrying about these craft, even though Major General Samford had stated that these sightings in the sky date back to biblical times, and they come back almost every century. So anyway, the CIA made the decision that this should be debunked, that people should not worry too much about any of this. And part of what they decided in this program was that the UFO should be viewed as phenomena, such as Foo Fighters during World War II. And I just told you that the name has now been officially changed from UFOs to UAPs, phenomena. They wanted a debunking campaign to reduce the public's interest through television, motion pictures, popular articles. Scientists were encouraged to debunk UFO reports through deductive reasoning, not through an examination of the evidence. They wanted the scientists to take credible people to present this information to the public, and then through deductive reasoning, they would embarrass that person by telling the public, oh, it was just a misidentification. This person didn't know what they were looking at. And and they also wanted surveillance of civilian UFO groups and their leaders as well. So they carried out this project. Dr. Donald Menzel wrote his first debunking book in 1953. It was published not long after the CIA-funded Robertson panel made this decision that this was going to be official policy. The Air Force and Project Blue Book had changes in their policies as well to debunk all of this. And Dr. Menzel was actually a very prominent astrophysicist at Harvard University. He ran the Harvard-Smithsonian Astrophysics Laboratory, the observatory, and my co-author, Stanton Friedman, was very curious about Dr. Menzel because in his research on the MJ-12 papers, and Majestic 12 was supposedly above top secret government group of scientists and military leaders who were working on the UFO situation and collecting evidence to try to back engineer these craft. So in the research that Stanton did, the papers he received, he discovered that Dr. Menzel was a member of MJ-12. And he said, how could this be? And what he did is, after Dr. Menzel died, he went to Harvard University. He had to get permission from Menzel's wife and a couple of other people, and he went through Dr. Menzel's files. And he discovered information where Dr. Menzel had written a letter to John F. Kennedy, President Kennedy, just before he became president. And Dr. Menzel said to him, I can give you more information when we are properly cleared to one another. Well, Stanton said, well, what do you mean properly cleared? Dr. Menzel had left an autobiography. And in that, he stated that he had a longer relationship with naval intelligence than anyone else. He was a member of the National Security Agency and closely connected with the CIA. So he was involved early on in all of this, and one of the first scientists who came up with debunking explanations, which didn't make sense if you actually looked at the evidence, which other scientists did. But it appeased the public.
So the debunkers are trying to keep the panic away from the public? Is that basically their aim?
Apparently, that was the government's policy. But the debunkers, the problem that I have with this, and that Stanton had too, is that honest, hard-working individuals who had these close-up encounters with UFOs or even were abducted, who didn't go public on their own, like my aunt and uncle. They always wanted to keep this confidential. It was released to the public as the result of a violation of confidentiality. But these disinformants is what I call them, because debunkers take the bunk out of a story. They were adding bunk to dissuade the public from believing it was true. So I call them disinformants, and they had a job to do, and that job was to reduce public hysteria, to convince the public that people who have these sightings or abductions are either misidentifying common phenomena, or are kooks, or mentally ill, or fanatics. And so I object, because I have investigated many of these cases, and these are good, honest, hardworking people, police officers, military officers, people like my aunt and uncle, who my aunt, the social worker, my uncle worked for the U.S. Post Office, but they were both actively involved in politics, in the civil rights movement. My uncle was even awarded a commendation for his work in civil rights, and through the U.S. poverty program by Sergeant Shriver, for helping to set up the Rockingham County Community Action Program to help the low-income people in the state of New Hampshire, and involved in politics in the time when we had literacy tests that were required before you could vote. He and my uncle worked on a literacy program to teach people who couldn't read how to read. So they were actively involved in their community, doing good things for people. He was on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission State Advisory Committee, appointed by the governor. So you can see that they were not a couple of kooks, but they were portrayed that way by people like Philip Klass, who took the true story of what happened, dissected it, and added a fictitious story every step along the way, with a lot of speculation as well. And I found all of this when I did my years of research and investigation on the case myself.
And we're talking with Kathleen Marden, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, her latest examination of the whole UFO system or unidentified aerial phenomenon. Couple more quick questions here, Kathleen. There's contactees and experiencers, apparently. Now, if you're talking to these people, how do you know they're on the level and they're not trying to shovel a load of bunk toward you?
Okay. The first thing I do is I let them know that I'm not going to publicize their story. If they're talking to me, then I'm there to help them to investigate their case, but no publicity is coming from me. I'm doing everything confidentially. Next, I look for evidence. What do they have for evidence? And I want to separate them if there's more than one. I want to hear each person's story. And if there's something that can be examined scientifically in a scientific laboratory, then I want to collect that, and I want to have that evidence scientifically evaluated as well. So it's a long process. I also have had FBI training in being able to identify deceptive body language. So that helps me as well. So even though there's not a lot of money available, to pay $75 or $750 for a lie detector test, I and others can use that FBI lie detector training that we have acquired. So we do a lot of those things. We look for certain patterned marks on the flesh of experiencers, people who have been abducted, and we have photographic evidence that we do not release. We have a catalog of it, of experiencers from around the world who have the same patterned marks on their bodies. We look for fluorescence on their bodies. Again, this is a patterned fluorescence, and we don't tell what the pattern is. So there are a number of things we look for. We want to know how much memory they have and how many people actually had this sighting. The more people who had the sighting, as long as they weren't hysterical about it and just really wanting to see something and making up a star that they were staring at long enough so that it appeared to move but didn't. We're looking for consistency and honesty and physical, circumstantial evidence, and also why they reported it. Have they reported anything like this before? And I think it's important, too, to learn about their background, because I want to know about their psychological makeup. And were they successful in what they did? Do they have a history of mental illness? I'm not saying people with mental illness don't see UFOs, but if they have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, a major mental illness, that has to be considered if it's only one individual who's having this experience. And what I end up finding out as I interview these individuals is that experience that they recall is unlike the other experiences of people who have been taken to craft, and really much more fearful, much more horrific. But it's a product of their disordered minds.
Got you. Thank you very much. Kathleen Marden has been with us. We've been discussing in the main fact, fiction, and flying saucers, but had all sorts of other tangential discussions, which of course add to the spice and the flavor of the topic. You have a website, I'm sure.
I do. It is Kathleen with a K, Kathleen - Marden, MARDEN.com. And all of my books are available through Amazon and Barnes & Noble in multiple formats. You'll see them on my website. There are some free articles that you can read as well on that website, and information about where I will be speaking, hopefully when COVID-19 dies down and it's safe again.
That's right. And as Fox Mulder would say, the truth is out there. Thank you very much, Kathleen Marden.
My pleasure.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.